Hi everyone, I'm Norm, the community liaison for Species at Risk here in the Tallgrass Prairie Natural Area. On previous episodes on this channel, we were introduced to the 28 species of species at risk we have in our area. On upcoming episodes, I'll be answering some of the more commonly asked questions, provide more in-depth details about these species at risk, and giving updates on anything species at risk or tallgrass prairie related. On this episode, I'm taking on a pretty big question that has a really great importance and does actually have a few different answers. So that question is, why are species at risk important? Species at risk top the list as species that have the possibility of becoming extinct or extirpated. So extirpated, if you've never heard of that term before, refers to species that no longer exist locally, so in an area, but do so elsewhere. So a good example of extirpated species in the tall grass area would be animals like plains bison or pronghorn antelope, or even, believe it or not, grizzly bear. So in the case of our local species at risk that we currently have, there's one important thing to remember, and that's a lot of them are at the very edge of their range, which makes sense if we consider Manitoba's positioning in Canada and North America. So an example of this would be the red-headed woodpecker's most northern range is around southern Manitoba. So the population that we have here in Manitoba is only a few thousand, but in their deeper population farther south, there is a lot more of them. So it's thought that populations become extirpated and eventually extinct by slowly shrinking in that area. So us being on the edge of that population range is a very important place to keep. Now, you may have heard the term web of life or food chain, and when even a single species is lost, when it's extirpated from an area, that web is broken and it can have huge effects on the smallest creatures to the very largest creatures, and that does include us. So we'll explore that further right away. So let's start with some of the direct influences that our species at risk have on this shared ecosystem of ours and that web of life. So 14 out of the 28 species at risk on our list are birds. Most of these birds eat insects as prey. 7 of those birds are called aerial insectivores. So that means that they catch insect prey while in flight. So these would be things like swallows, like bank swallows and barn swallows, flycatchers like the olive-sided, and nightjars like the whippoorwill. So what these birds do is they keep pest insects in check. And that does include the potential pests that do damage to the crops that we depend on. Another thing that these aerial insectivores do is that they are a valuable prey source for species that are higher up on that food chain. One of the big reasons for that is because if we were to group all of these Canadian aerial insectivores into a big group, they would be upon millions of them. So sounds like there's a lot of them, means that there's a lot of valuable prey for predators. What's important to note is you might think, okay, millions of birds, why are they species at risk? Well, there's been really sharp decline in bird population, especially aerial insectivores in Canada. So since about 1970, we've had upwards of a 60% decrease of aerial insectivores in Canada. So here is starting to be a bit of a problem. So let's connect this web of life directly with our species at risk we have. So we just mentioned the aerial insectivores and their relationship with insects. We do have two insects on our species at risk list, the monarch butterfly and Powell-Cheek skipperling butterfly. Probably not at the high end of the table on these aerial insectivores menu, but I'm sure they do make their way as a prey source for some birds. Now what these two butterflies do is provide really valuable services as pollinators for all the incredible flora that we have in the tallgrass prairie. Now here we're really lucky to have some extremely rare flora, things like small white lady slippers, Culver's root, western prairie fringe orchids that are really amazing, and they provide for the ecosystem as well. And let's not forget that trees are in that grouping of flora. So the black ash is another species at risk, and what these do is, as a tree, they do innumerable services for our ecosystem. They improve air quality, help even fight climate change, they improve water quality, reduce flooding, and even erosion. Alright, so if we're tying this back into the very top, I mentioned the aerial insectivores this whole time, the bank swallow being one of them. One of the big reasons that the bank swallow's numbers are plummeting is because of that loss of nesting habitat. They nest in the banks of rivers mostly, and rivers around these parts are having big issues with erosion. Well, black ash will help with that control of the erosion. So you can see that even our individual species at risk are helping each other out in certain ways. Now, there's a lot more physical benefits that I could go on about, but I think that everyone gets the idea of what I'm saying. There's also other ways that species at risk can help with us. So I've more or less listed some facts of what these species at risk can do for this shared ecosystem of ours. And there's much more that I can get into with this. But for me, the easiest and hardest thing that I can do is explain what species at risk, what nature with being outdoors does for me. So it generally provides a sense of well-being that you can't really get anywhere else. Spending outside, it sort of recharges that battery, and it also inspires us. And when we think about losing a small part of that inspiration of the outdoors, it can really have some huge effects on us as people as a whole. So I think most nature lovers have an idea of what I'm trying to say by this, but it's also another thing to think of. Nature affects us not only physically, but mentally as well, and some would even say spiritually. This whole idea of why species at risk are important is really a huge topic, like I said from the top, and I've really only started to scratch the surface on it, but I think I'll leave it at that. What we have to remember is that we can all play our own small role in aiding the recovery efforts to ensure that these species at risk survive and thrive, so that the next generation has the same opportunity to enjoy them that we have had. So that's everything I have for you. Thanks everyone so much for watching this episode, and as usual, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to contact me at sarcommunityliaison@gmail.com. See you next time.